In this episode, we do briefly talk about domestic violence, and just want you to know that in regards to a potential trigger warning for you. We don't go deep into the details, but wanted to let you know that that is mentioned and discussed in regards to a little bit with our guest today. Every single phase of private practice has its own unique challenges and its own unique opportunities. Whether you're starting and growing a solo practice, getting a group practice going, whether you're already a group practice boss or you want to go big and go national with the skills you have, every phase has its challenges. And doing that in community with people and learning from other folks and having that guidance is so, so important. That's why we have a membership community for every phase of practice. Next Level Practice is for solo practitioners to help you get organized, fill up your practice, and get that solo practice rocking. We have small groups, we have accountability partners, we have live events every single week. And also, if in the first 3 months, in the first 90 days, you're not satisfied, we have a 90-day money-back guarantee. Next, we have Group Practice Launch. Group Practice Launch is a 6-month program specifically for you to launch a group practice. We have weekly meetings with that as well as guided courses, and you get full access to Next Level Practice. And you're guaranteed to hire someone in the first 6 months, or you get to go through it again for free. Next, we have Group Practice Boss. Group Practice Boss is for people that have group practices and want to continue to grow. All those ups and downs of having a group practice, of changing that mindset, being in community with other people, and getting that support from us. We, with that as well, have weekly meetings, and you get to come to Next Level Practice events as well. So that's 8 meetings a month that you could come to live to get extra help. Also, there's a 90-day money-back guarantee. Lastly, we have Audience Building Academy. Audience Building Academy is specifically for people that are ready to level up and go national. Maybe you want to get a traditionally published book, have a podcast, launch some e-products and e-courses and scalable income. Audience Building Academy is specifically for you so that you can level up and go national. We'll walk you through exactly how you go from having a solo or a group practice to going national. We'll help you build your email list, get on podcasts, and really level up. So no matter what your phase is, we have a membership community for you. Over at practiceofthepractice.com/memberships, you can read all about them and sign up. Go in there and decide which membership phase is for you and join today. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/memberships. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1154. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast, where we help you build a thriving private practice that you absolutely love. And this month, we are doing our Even Better Year series. I named it that, Even Better Year. Instead of best year ever or new year, new me, because I feel like my posture towards growth, towards becoming a better person, a better human, a better business person, a better parent, all those areas, more times than not, comes from just saying, how can I be even better than I was yesterday, last week, last month, last year? Just a step in the right direction. I was actually just talking with my mom about this. I do improv. And so I had an improv show on Sunday, and she hung out with the girls. They're old enough they could go to bed on their own, but they get a little nervous. They're 10 and 13. So it's nice to have, my mom hang out, and she hung out afterwards. We had a glass of wine together. And we were talking about how recently I got really frustrated with my 13-year-old, and I had raised my voice, and how, just kind of looking at each generation trying to do better than the generation before. And we had this really honest conversation about how it's like, she talked about how my grandfather's father, so my great grandfather, how he was a Detroit cop who protected the mayor and routinely beat my grandfather because his mother had died, and my grandfather was the youngest and was kind of blamed for that with a lot of kind of the stuff that had happened. And it was like some birth stuff and heart issues, and I don't know the full story. Now then, my grandfather, who had all this trauma, my mom said he only said "I love you" to her once in his whole life, or once in her whole life. and how there was some, abuse with, my uncle, and but not with my mom or my aunt. And then it's like, we go to my parents' generation, and I was probably spanked 15 times. So like, and then, I spanked my daughter once when she was little. I'm like, I don't want to be a dad that spanks. And it was interesting because we were talking about kind of the arc of generations of parents improving each generation a little bit more. And to me, I think that's just such to me, a different way of thinking about things than just it's a new year. We're going to start working out this month, this like short lived way of thinking about things. And so that's why we're doing this series this month called the Even Better Year series. And, that's really exciting for me because we have Dima Ghawi, who is with us today. And Dima is Middle Eastern in her genes, American in her heart, and a global citizen in her spirit. She ignites the untapped potential in individuals across the globe, empowering them to shatter limitations and become courageous, purpose-driven leaders. Her own journey is one of escaping confinement, crossing continents, and transforming her life's purpose. Harnessing the power of her story, Dima is committed to inspiring individuals to attain personal and professional growth. Dima, welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Hi, Joe. I'm very excited to be here.
Oh, I am so excited to have you here. We started to talk a little bit about what we were going to talk about, but we paused it because I want the story to just be while we're talking. So let's start with, you have a story of, all these things I just listed, but that ultimately for you centers around forgiveness. Take us back to where the story begins, and then I'm just going to follow my curiosity as I have questions.
Yeah, the story started in Amman, Jordan. That's the capital of Jordan in the Middle East. And I was 5 years old playing with my grandmother in her kitchen. I always loved spending time with my grandmother. That's why I loved when you were talking earlier about the generations. And that day, things were a little different. She wasn't as fun as usual. She held a glass vase and she looked at me in a very serious way and she said, "Do you see this perfect glass vase? A girl is just like it. If it gets cracked for any reason, you can never fix it. You can never glue it back. No one would want it. And that's the one we throw in the trash." So I was just 5 years old hearing this story. It at that time it didn't mean anything to me. I didn't understand what's the meaning of a perfect glass and why my grandmother was so serious. But as I started growing up, I started hearing more and more of these messages related to the expectations that I was supposed to live and obey. And was supposed not to have an identity. Otherwise, there would be judgment and people are watching. And any mistake I would make, that would be considered a crack in the vase. And then I would not be good enough and I would be thrown in the trash. So that's how the story started. Long time ago, but it is something that lived with me for years and years, even until today.
Well, and what a message as, a 5-year-old to hear. And, I think that, anytime we have grandparents giving us messages, there's all sorts of things that come from those generations that maybe we don't believe anymore, but we still absorbed as kids. Do you remember as a kid kind of having that be like a guiding way that you thought about yourself? Like, how did you think about that cracked vase metaphor, like in your childhood?
Yeah, it meant that I'm not supposed to make mistakes. I was supposed to always be worried about how I'm being perceived by others. I would have to follow, I have to obey. And it was as painful as it was, but it was simple because everybody else was doing that. So it wasn't even allowed to question the norm or challenge it. Nobody else was doing that. So why do it? So when I was 19, I got engaged to the most eligible bachelor in our community. And my parents were just so happy. Everybody was extremely envious that he chose me to that he wanted to marry me. He was much older, and we got married and we moved to San Diego, California. And that's when everything started changing for me. First, I came here to the US not knowing that I have an identity, but then I started watching people around me and watching, even at the grocery store, watching couples and how they interact with each other, watching more American shows. And that's when I started to truly question the life that I was living. That marriage turned out to be abusive. And I was totally stuck because if I would do anything or I would even consider leaving that marriage, it would be considered by my family that it was a crack in the vase and it was not accepted. So I just lived and I obeyed. And there was something I heard growing up that our destiny is written in our forehead. So the destiny of our life, the story of our life is already predetermined. It's written on our forehead. We cannot change it. We cannot challenge it. We just need to live it and accept it. And that's exactly what I did. I accepted and I lived, but I was getting deeper and deeper in depression. And where I come from, I didn't hear anything about mental well-being or mental illness or depression growing up. They usually would not look good at somebody who is experiencing any of these things, but it's not something we talked about. So I didn't understand what was happening to me. All I knew is I was getting every morning I would be waking up very sad. I would feel guilty for no reason, all of these emotions. And even though it was a painful time in my life, I truly believe it was the best thing that ever happened to me that I got into depression because it made me question the norm for the first time ever. I started to question my grandmother's story. I started to question the abuse that I was experiencing. I started to question a lot of like the destiny written on our forehead, all of these things. And I got to a point where I just couldn't take it anymore. And one day I just packed and I escaped. And that's when my world fell apart.
Hmm. So what did that escape look like? I mean, were you planning for a while? Like, and how did your world fall apart?
What happened? It wasn't planning for a while. What happened was that within a month I planned the entire escape. I was lucky because even though I was not allowed to do many things while I was in that marriage, I wasn't allowed to talk to my mom more than 20 minutes a week. And it had to be on a Saturday and he had to be next to me. I wasn't allowed to have friends. I wasn't allowed to leave our home without permission. But the one thing I was allowed to do that I wanted was my education. I wanted to become the first educated woman in our family. And he agreed, thank goodness. So I graduated and I had a little job that paid very, very, very little. But it was the best blessing ever. Because of that job, I was able to rent like a one bedroom apartment in a very unsafe area, because that's all I could afford. So I rented the apartment and one day I just packed and I escaped. It happened, he was in Jordan. He was starting a business in Jordan, and I was required to live with his parents at that time. So I just took my stuff and I left. But the reaction was horrible. Like my entire community in Jordan disowned me. I became what my grandmother told me. I became broken. I became unaccepted. And one person decided that I don't even deserve to live, and that is my father. So in my small community, we're a Catholic community in Jordan, and I'm always intentional in mentioning the religion because I don't want to have any stereotypes about other religions like Islam. I was born and raised Catholic. If a woman does anything that's not accepted by the father, the uncle, the brother, they kill her and they call it honor killing. And it's still happening until today. We may not hear much about it because many times these cases are not even reported. In my situation, I am in the US and my father doesn't know how to speak English, even though he was threatening sometimes on a daily basis, which is a big part of the abusive personality. Even if he couldn't get to me, he made me live in fear every single minute and every single second. Now it's been 23 years since I escaped, but I still live in that fear. My dad is much older now. He's about to turn 80, but at the same time, he's still alive. And I believe I'm the only one who was so happy during COVID when they shut down the airports and there were no international flights. I felt the safest ever. And while
Mm.
everybody was complaining that they couldn't travel internationally, I was praying that they keep extending that shutdown. So, but it is the story of challenging these the expected perfection and that we're not allowed to make mistakes. And to get to a point where we realize, let's try again, let's forgive, let's move on. Because the anger I had related to my ex-husband and the abuse and my community and my father, all that did to me was a huge burden that made me sick and made me unhappy and crushed my confidence.
Yeah. Something always comes up when you're running a private practice. Well, Gusto's payroll and HR services can make it a little easier. Gusto was designed for you, the small business owner. They take the pain out of running a business, automatically calculating paychecks, filing payroll taxes, setting up open enrollment. Gusto does it all. Want more? Time tracking, health insurance, 401k, onboarding, commuter benefits, offer letters, access to HR experts. You get the idea. With Gusto, you can focus on the joy of running your business. It's super easy to set up and get started. And if you're moving from another provider, Gusto can transfer all the data for you. It's no surprise 99% of businesses said the value they get for Gusto is worth the price. And here's the best part. Because you're a listener, you get 3 months totally free. All you have to do is go to gusto.com/Joe. Again, that's gusto.com/Joe. I'm telling you, you're going to love Gusto. Get started today. Before we jump to the forgiveness side, I want to hear a little bit more about that process. And it's more my own personal interest because many of you have heard my story where, during COVID, the mother of my kids and my two kids and I went in a camper from September of 2020 until April of 21 to live in national parks, which was supposed to be this epic family adventure. And in the midst of that, she decided to leave and to stay in California, and I brought the kids back home and now have, full physical custody of the kids, and they maybe see her 50 or 60 nights a year. Um, and my therapist really encouraged me to not jump to the forgiveness and not jump to the, like, as a therapist, you see people's potential, you see people's growth edges, you hope people can change over time. But he really pushed me to get into kind of my anger and my frustration, like, and the sense of injustice and feeling like I didn't ask to be a single dad or to have a co-parent that, maybe isn't as reliable as I would hope for. Dima, for you, um, how did you step into maybe some of that anger at your situation or frustration or sadness or, I mean, the grief of just, like, wanting to be married to someone that, isn't abusive and that you love and can have a great relationship with? Like, how did that look before you got to the forgiveness?
I feel there was a step even before that. And it is how we distract ourselves from even thinking about the healthy partner and a better life and all of these things. It was, to me, it was becoming a workaholic, working day and night, constantly keeping myself busy because I was afraid of even dealing with these emotions. I call it as if I put all of my emotions in a big, heavy black box and I blocked it, but it's invisible and it walked with me everywhere. And once in a while, a little crack would come out, like a little emotion comes out, and all the triggers happen, and then I wouldn't be able to handle them. But what I did is I blocked it again. And I did that for 8 years. I refused to make myself feel. I was constantly distracting myself. And I called it ambitious. I called that I'm very ambitious. So I'm just going to continue to work and I'm going to continue to. At that time, I also enrolled in a master's in business program. So going to school, working full time, dealing with these death threats constantly. I just kept myself so busy until one day I got very, very, very sick. And it was in 2009 when there was a swine flu. So your story is with COVID. My story was
Mm.
with swine flu. I got the swine flu, but it really affected me physically. I was sick, ended in the hospital, and it attacked my liver. And my doctors didn't know what to do with that. Then I was in a short term disability for a month and a half. It was the best thing ever, even though it was painful. I was forced to lay down in my home alone and and there's so many movies I can watch. At that time, I didn't have Netflix, but it made me reflect about the life that I wanted. And I realized that the life I was living was not the life I wanted. I didn't want to constantly be in fear and escaping and hiding from my emotions. And it's definitely not being ambitious what I was doing. So that's when I started my healing journey. And all I wanted at that time is somebody to help me heal from or help me forgive my dad and my ex husband and my community. That's all I wanted. But truly from the journey, what I discovered was that I need to start by forgiving myself. Because it's easy when we're being programmed about with all these stories to blame ourselves, to think that we're not good, that I am not a good daughter. I didn't obey what my dad wanted. I destroyed my family with their reputation in Jordan. I thought I was selfish. So the whole thing was not about forgiving my dad and my ex-husband initially. It was about forgiving myself. And truly, that was the hardest forgiveness to ever do.
Mm. Yeah, I love that you bring up distraction. I mean, I think that at least for me, working with my therapist, as I was divorcing and the time after, some of that distraction was really helpful because it felt so overwhelming, kind of what was happening. And so to fall into podcasting, to be doing consulting, to going out with friends, that was helpful to not just constantly be ruminating on what was happening and going down that path of all the different scenarios that could play out. What for you helped you see that distraction wasn't serving you?
I think it was my intuition. I knew deep inside my heart what I was doing. So when I started seeing therapists and energy healers and counselors and people that helped me with things like EFT and which is emotional freedom technique and inner child work and all the reprogramming that we had to do with my brain, it truly was. It started with intuition. I knew deep inside my heart what I was doing, even though I was even ignoring the signs that I was giving myself.
Mm. So tell me about just forgiveness and kind of moving into that out of kind of the workaholic productivity side of distracting yourself.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, it had to start with forgiving myself. And it was a huge burden to accept myself, accept my decisions, and to realize that I truly did the right thing. It wasn't about being selfish or that I'm a bad daughter. And when I forgave myself, that's when I started having some energy to work on my dad. One time I had a 3 hour session. So for our listeners right now, imagine working with one of your clients for 3 hours to just be able to look at the picture of my dad. That's it. I just couldn't look at his picture. So 3 hours to just be able to do that. But then part of the work was to truly understand where he's coming from and why he did what he did. So it's in a way role playing, understanding what it's not that he was trying to be a bad father, but he has his own ways as well, right? Like my story was taught to women, but men have vases. Every single gender, every single ethnicity, we all have these things. So that was a big part of the forgiveness where I started seeing him and my ex-husband and my community for the programming that they were raised with. And that's when I started able to let go. The most amazing thing that happened in my life when I went through this forgiveness journey, I became happier, which was strange for me at that time. I became more confident. I felt that I was becoming stronger. And somehow I started doing better at work. I got promoted into leadership. Then I got promoted into managing a global team. All of these doors started opening up. And now when I look back, obviously it makes sense. At that time it didn't, but now obviously it makes sense because all of these burdens, the heavy black box, even though it's invisible, it is affecting every interaction we do. It's affecting the voice in our head and what we tell ourselves about who we are. So when I started releasing these horrible memories and emotions and reprogramming my brain, I started getting closer to my true authentic self and the person that I truly, truly want to be. And that's when doors started opening.
Mm. Now, you link in a lot of your teachings and your keynotes, you link leadership and leadership skills and leadership development to that forgiveness process. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so my keynotes and are mainly motivational, but we cannot just tell people to feel good and to feel motivated and just go home. We need to make an impact and help to do something that is lasting. So that's why I get to share my story in my keynotes and help people reflect about the vases in their lives and what is pushing them down, what is keeping them silent. And a big part of that is to help them realize that part of the journey of the self discovery is to let go of all of these old programmings, old emotions, and to let them go so they can truly be allow themselves to grow and to rise and to grow higher and higher. So that's in terms of the keynotes. With the leadership work, I do a lot of workshops and executive coaching, and I'm so surprised, specifically with the executive coaching, how I'm working with these executives that have like very fancy titles, but they meet with me and they tell me about their fears of making mistakes and their worries of being judged, or that they have been told early on that they're a disappointment. So imagine like working with a CEO that's telling us these things. And I realized that a lot of the coaching becomes not just about business, all of this old programming and the stories they have been told that they believe are stopping them from creating this amazing engagement with their employees and the culture, and even be happy about achieving the big accomplishments that they did, that many times they don't realize how absolutely amazing they are. So I get to talk to them about that. I get to talk to them about the vases and help them shatter it. And a big part of it, even though I don't do the counseling work, and I'm very sensitive to, of course, not to go there. I'm not certified in that, but I refer them to amazing counselors that I know. So I'll work on the business side, and the counselors that I partner with help them with the healing and forgiveness side.
Hmm. I love that you just used the word shatter when you said shatter that, given the context of the vase story at the beginning. Given that narrative that you were given as a child, you said sometimes, those old patterns come up in our leadership. For you personally, how has some of that kind of initial training, the vase example, how has that manifest in your leadership where you realized, oh, that's an old pattern that I need to undo. That's not how I want to lead anymore.
It happened. Sometimes it's major things, sometimes it's a little thing. So the major one was I got to move to Japan with IBM. I went on an international assignment. And I realized when I was in Japan how women are being treated. It felt very similar to the way I was treated growing up. So while I was there driving positive change and help improve the communication, I was constantly being triggered. I was by watching the women being silenced and not being respected, and a lot of things that was so obvious as I was growing up. So that's when I real like just the trigger to me is a sign that I have something to work more on and I have more vases, because I cannot be triggered as a leader and try to get the best out of my team. So that was just one example where I would, it's just my surrounding, observing my surrounding. And whenever I see injustice, whenever I see people being shut down or being hurt or having high expectations of them, I would be triggered. And that was a sign that I have another vase to shatter, because in order for me to help other people, I cannot be constantly triggered. And I need, the more I heal myself, it becomes like I think it's called the wounded healer. I need to be wounded, but I need to heal myself so I would be able to heal other people.
Mm. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing so much of your healing journey and how that manifests. The last question that I always ask is, if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
I want them to know how important their work is. I want them to know how they or other people in their surrounding were a big part of my healing and big part of what made me who I am right now. I would not be able to be on the stage and inspire people from all around the world without all the amazing healers, just like our listeners right now. It can get frustrating, and many times we are hearing very sad stories, and it can be draining. But at the same time, it is meaningful because they're changing the world one person at a time. And it started with me. So I'm grateful for them.
Hmm. Dima, if people want to connect with you, if they want to learn more about your work, where should we send them?
So my website is dimaghawi.com, which is my name. And also on Amazon, there is my book, Breaking Vases. So you can just type Breaking Vases, and you'll be able to get it. I would love to hear from them. Reach out to me. Would love to hear their stories, their experiences, and my website and Amazon.
So awesome. Thank you so much for being on the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Hearing Dima's story and raising two girls primarily on my own, that idea of breaking vases and exposing them to women's stories of change, of development, of freedom, of sadness. I mean, just all of that. These are the kind of stories that I want them to be raised on, and I want them to hear, and I want them to kind of figure out for themselves, what is their vase that they've inherited from me. I'm sure there's going to be missteps that I take as a parent that need some undoing later also. Even just that story that I talked about with my mom at the beginning. It was a really healing story that just came about from us having a conversation and being a little more honest about just, stepping into kind of a new friendship, a new way of talking to each other. And so I'm looking forward to, as my girls grow up, sharing these kind of stories with them to learn and grow through other women's stories. So go grab that book, and thank you so much for hanging out with us today. We couldn't do this without our sponsors, and today's sponsor is Gusto. So if you are looking for help when it comes to your payroll, when it comes to getting help with 401k benefits, onboarding tools, you name it, Gusto makes it easy. It's what we use over here at Practice the Practice. You'll even get 3 months for free when you use promo code Joe. So go to gusto.com/Joe. Again, that's gusto.com/Joe. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.